There's been a lot in the news lately about irregular border crossings in Canada, and unfortunately a lot of information online that's been plain wrong or inaccurate. I thought it was a good opportunity to talk about the facts on Canada's border. Canadians want a system that is generous and compassionate, that provides safe harbor for those that are fleeing persecution, those who would be fleeing violence or potentially death. But they also want to make sure that process is fair, equitable, and transparent. And those are the values that guide our decisions, not only in dealing with situations on the border, but dealing with refugees more generally. Now, certainly it's true that the number of asylum seekers who've been crossing at the border have been higher than we've seen in the last number of years. But in context, we need to look at the fact that the overall numbers are actually quite a bit lower than years that we dealt with in the past, 2008 as an example. And in 2008, the RCMP, Immigration, and CBSA had less resources than they have today to deal with the problem. So the situation is well in hand, but we continue to monitor it on a regular basis to make sure that our response is appropriate and is going to ensure that the local dynamic is being dealt with exactly as it needs to be. Now, some have said very erroneously that the number of asylum seekers is not available. It absolutely is. In fact, in the description below, there's a link that you can click with updated information on the number of asylum seekers who are not only crossing at the border, but any form of asylum seeker who's seeking to come to Canada. So you can click on that below if you want the most updated information. The other fact that I think it's really important to stress is that there's no such thing as a free ticket to Canada. For those that have been saying an irregular border crossing is a free ticket to Canada, nothing could be further from the truth. If somebody crosses at an irregular border crossing, in other words, at a place other than a normal border crossing, they will be apprehended by either police or local officials. They're going to face a quasi-judicial process with the Immigration and Refugee Board to ascertain the legitimacy of their claim. And if their claim isn't legitimate, they're going to be immediately deported. Now, some say, well, why don't we just throw them back? Why do we even have that process? If they arrive irregularly, just throw them out. Well, there's a couple of really important reasons we don't do that. Number one, we've signed conventions against doing so, namely the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and also the UN Convention in 1951 on refugees, both of which explicitly state that we have to determine the legitimacy of a claim before throwing somebody back. And that brings me to the second point, which is that if somebody is fleeing persecution, if they're fleeing torture, if they're fleeing perhaps certain death, Canada cannot just throw them back to that fate if they've arrived on a Canadian shore. We have an obligation, not only, I would say, in convention, but also morally to make sure that that claim is or is not legitimate before we make a decision. Again, if it's not, they get deported. And this process is overseen by the United Nations. They come and review the work that Canada is doing. We take their reviews very seriously. They've called what they've seen impressive, compassionate. They've noted that it's working very well. And we're going to continue to review their commentary. This time, I also really want to take an opportunity to thank the communities of Emerson and Hemmingford who've been so generous in their response. Their local officials and the people in the communities have really done a phenomenal job of stepping up and helping to deal with the situation. We're very grateful for their efforts. And overall, I want to say, back to my original point, that we'll continue to ensure that the Canadian values of compassion and protecting the most vulnerable are upheld, while at the same time having a system that's fair and equitable and transparent. If you'd like more information, feel free to email us. It's in the description below. We'd love to hear from you. And that's the facts on Canada's border.